The cards in this binder tell the story of the 25-year-old Pokemon TCG metagame. My name is Bert and I commentate official Pokemon TCG event. Let's begin. Haymaker was one of the Pokemon TCG's most iconic early decks back in the base set days. Hitmonchan was the main attacker, with jab dealing for 1 energy 20 damage. This was extremely strong. Electabuzz was helpful by overcoming the flying types like Farfetch'd that resisted Hitmonchan, and could also paralyze on a coin flip too. Later on in jungle, Scyther would add to the party. Swords Dance would boost Slash's damage all the way to 60 and also had a free retreat cost too. It wasn't all just Haymaker decks though, since Blastoise was kinda successful. Its Rain Dance ability would let you attach as many water energy from your hand to your Pokemon as you liked in a turn. Articuno was one of the best partners for Blastoise, since Blizzard hit for good numbers and could spread some damage too. Back in this era of the Pokemon TCG, there were no supporters, so everything was just a trainer that you could play as many as you liked in a turn. So Professor Oak was drawing 7 cards was just insane. Computer Search would let you grab any card you like from your deck, and Superior Energy Removal would discard 2 energy from your opponent's Pokemon, all with pretty low drawback. Wigglytuff also saw some play, since its Do the Wave attack would deal 60 damage if you had a full bench of Pokemon. Moving on to Fossil, and we had one of the strongest Pokemon powers in the game with Muck. Toxic Gas would shut off all Pokemon powers while it was in play, making life hard for certain decks like Blastoise. Dark Vileplume released in Team Rocket, and its Pokemon power Hay Fever would stop all trainers from being played. As you could imagine, this would grind a lot of decks down to a halt instantly as soon as it came out. It was around this time that the game changed drastically, with Team Rocket's Sneak Attack, which would let you shuffle away 3 cards from your opponent's hand on a coin flip, and Rocket's Trap that would let you shuffle away a trainer card from your opponent's hand. This meant if you was going first, you would try and shuffle away all your opponent's cards before they had a chance to do anything. Erica's Jigglypuff would also try and knock out your opponent's active first turn by dealing 40 damage for a double colourless energy attachment, which combined with plus powers could literally KO anything. Rocket Zapdos saw a ton of play and became one of the game's most deadly basic attackers. Plasma would accelerate energy from the discard pile to itself, and Electro Burn would deal massive damage. Erica's Dratini was a fun card. It would reduce all damage done to it over 20 back down to 10 if the opponent's attacker was a basic Pokemon. This was really good for jamming in the active if your opponent had shuffled away all your cards from the Team Rocket cards you mentioned earlier. But now we move into the Neo era of the Pokemon TCG, and we have to talk about Sneasel. Beat Up would flip a coin for each bench Pokemon you have in play, and you would deal 20 for each heads. This had no problem one-shotting everything in the format, especially when you consider that Special Darkness Energy was the only way to power it up, meaning you would always have an additional 20 damage too. Slowking's Pokemon Power Mind Games was meant to force your opponent to flip heads whenever they wanted to play a trainer card, while Slowking was in the active. If you flip tails, the trainer card would fail, effectively making your opponent's trainers only 50% effective, while Slowking was in the active. Instead, it got mistranslated though, allowing Mind Games to activate while Slowking was on the bench. This meant you could have 3 or 4 of these in play and force your opponent to flip 3 or 4 consecutive heads to play any trainer cards. These two took over the Pokemon TCG in a commanding way. However, Cleffa made the game playable, since it forced all the Rocket cards out of the game that we mentioned earlier. Since as long as you had Cleffa in the active and could hold on to 1 energy card, after having your hand peppered, you could use Eek to fill your hand back up to 7. Even after getting hammered by Rocket's Trap and Sneak Attack. In response to Slowking, some players started to use Igglybuff, since its Gaze Pokemon power would turn off another Pokemon's power for a turn, making trainers easier to use. Both of these Pokemon had the baby Pokemon rule too, so if your opponent wanted to hit into them, they would be forced to flip a coin, and if tails, no damage was dealt. In response to these baby Pokemon, Dustin Austin played Dark Fraligator, whose Pokemon power Stare prevented all opponents' baby Pokemon from attacking or using Pokemon powers whilst it was in the active. This was so successful that it won the first World Championships in 2002. Entei Macargo was another strong deck from this era. Entei's Howl power would attach energy to Macargo, who would then discard them for massive damage. a pretty iconic deck from that era. Moving on to the e-reader sets now though, and we start to see our first supporter cards. You could only play one supporter card in your turn, but they normally have very powerful effects. Copycat, for example, would let you shuffle in your hand to draw the same amount that was in your opponent's hand. Oracle would let you put any 2 cards to the top of your deck, which worked very well with Delcatty and Magneton. Magneton would let you discard 1 card from your hand to get back 2 basic energy from your discard pile. Very nice. And Delcatty would let you discard an energy to draw 3 cards. This engine was played in almost every single deck, with Oracle, since now you could essentially grab any 2 cards from your deck with a combination of Delcatty and Oracle. It was around this time that EX Pokemon were first introduced. These were stronger cards, but they gave up 2 prize cards when they were KO'd. One deck that played this Delcatty engine was Blaziken. Firestarter would let you attach a fire energy from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. This was some amazing energy acceleration, and paired stupidly well with Blaziken EX, whose Volcanic Ash would deal an 100 damage snipe to any one of your opponent's Pokemon. Gardevoir was also a very strong deck at this time too. Gardevoir EX would deal 10 damage for each card in your opponent's hand, which was often a lot since a lot of decks played Steven's Advice as their main draw supporter. And Psystorm would have a high damage output, dealing 10 for each energy card in play. There was another Gardevoir that this would work extremely well with too, since its Psy Shadow ability would let you attach a psychic energy from the deck to one of your Pokemon. This would let you power up Gardevoir EX really fast. One card that made these stage 2 decks playable was Rare Candy, since back then you could go straight from a basic like a Torchic to a Blaziken in a single turn without having to wait a turn like modern evolution rules. However, at the 2004 World Championships, it was a surprise deck that took the whole event down, and Magma Groudon was the centerpiece. Pulverize would deal 70 damage if your opponent's active had any damage counters on it, and this would add up fast since it was hitting for dark typing and fighting typing at the same time. Magma Claydol would move energy around and also allow you to hit for psychic weakness at the same time. Magma Energy would let you power up your attackers fast, since it would count for 2 fighting energy or 2 dark energy at the same time. This Magma deck ended up winning all age divisions at the 2004 World Championships, a feat that has never been done again since. At the 2005 World Championships, Nidoqueen managed to take 1st and 3rd place. Power Lariat would add up really fast. Pidgeot was played in that deck, and a lot of other decks at the time too, since Quick Search would let you grab any card from your deck once per turn, one of the best cards ever printed. At this time, Celio's network was a format staple. It would allow you to grab any Pokemon from your deck as long as it wasn't an EX, really showing the power level of supporter cards back then. 4th place at the 2005 World Championships was a Dark Tyranitar deck that actually played 2 different Dark Tyranitar cards. Both were very strong, but this one would place extra damage counters in between turns with its sand damage Pokemon body. Medicham EX won 2 age divisions at 2005 Worlds, but not Masters. Its Wise Aura body would turn off all Pokemon powers while it was in the active, making it a devastating denial deck. Rocket's Admin was one of the greatest cards ever printed, doubling up as a draw supporter in the early game, but a devastating late game disruptive option, since it would shuffle both players' hands back into their deck and then they would draw the same amount of prize cards they had left. This was a massive staple right up until it rotated. Jirachi was also a staple at the time. Wishing Star would let you look at the top 5 cards of your deck and then take one, when Jirachi was in the active, but then it would go to sleep. As long as you had switching cards, this was a fantastic way of seeing other cards throughout the game, getting an immense amount of value. Moving forward to the 2006 World Championships, and Lugia EX Blastoise was the deck to beat. Blastoise Energy Rain would let you attach as many water energy as you like in a turn, and Lugia EX would swing super hard, with Elemental Blast dealing 200 damage, pretty much evaporating anything in its way. Although the deck that ended up winning was a Manectric EX Mew EX deck. Manectric EX had the Disconnect attack that would lock your opponent from playing any trainer cards apart from supporters in their next turn. This would let you lock in Curse Stone to chip extra damage into play, or Battle Frontier to turn off Pidgeot EX's Quick Search. Versatile for Mew EX would let you use any attack from any Pokemon in play as long as you had the necessary energy to use it. And since Jason Klasinski played 4 multi-energy, that means you had a lot of energy to copy other attacks quite often. After that, the Hollon engine was given to the world, and it was very strong. While the Hollon supporters like Scientist, Adventurer and Mentor were of a lower power level compared to non-Hollon supporters, Hollon Transceiver made up for it, and it made the engine very strong. Hollon Transceiver would let you grab any Hollon supporter from your discard pile or your deck. This led to unparalleled levels of consistency. It wasn't just supporters though, since Hollon Pokemon also existed. These would let you attach them as an effective double rainbow energy. Hollon's cast form was the most prominent, since it doubled up as a good lead Pokemon too, with its Delta Draw attack. This led to Hollon cards having a stranglehold on the metagame via trainers, supporters and Pokemon too. This led to one of the most successful rogue decks of all time that actually met itself in the finals of US Nationals 2006. Only a few players knew about it, as it was only built about a week or so before the event. It was built around Delta Raichu and Delta Executor. Raichu for 1 energy would spread 20 damage to any Pokemon that had a Pokemon Power or a Pokemon Body. With this combined with Cursed Stone, this would spread damage at a really fast rate. If you needed some more punch power, then Executor would step in, since Delta Circle would deal 10 plus 10 for each Delta Pokemon you had in play. All topped off with a nice Hollon supporter package. After that, we would see one of the coolest World Championship decks in 2007, where Tom Roos won it all with an Evolution deck, consisting with Jolteon EX, Espeon EX, Vaporeon EX, all having different coming into play abilities. Absol EX will also be very helpful for moving damage around too, with its Poke Body. And this stunning Rayquaza EX would be a massive attacker too, all wrapped up with a Hollon supporter package and cast form. We also saw the strongest tool card ever printed here too, played with Empoleon and Blissey, and to be honest, a lot of other cards. And it saw some success at the highest of levels, including the 2007 Worlds and 2008 too, with Blissey getting second place in 2008. That tool card is Cessation Crystal. This would turn off all Poke Powers and Poke Bodies if the Pokemon it was attached to is in the active spot, leading to some very disruptive decks. Dusknoir was a very scary card that would shuffle away one of your opponent's bench Pokemon if they had 5 in play. Considering you could bench Duskull, rare candy into it, turn 1, all in a single turn, and then shuffle away whatever you liked, this literally changed how people would play the Pokemon TCG. 2008 Worlds though was the Gardevoir-Gallade show. This is in contention for being one of the strongest decks of all time. Gardevoir had the Telepass Pokemon power, which would let you use a supporter in your opponent's discard pile as the effect of this Pokemon power. This could either let you double up on consistency supporters by playing 2 of them in a single turn for example, or double down on disruptive supporters if your opponent had them in the discard pile, or do one of each. Psychic Lock was also very awesome, turning off all opponents' Pokemon powers on their next turn. This would grind down most decks to a halt. You could even use Gardevoir Level X, which would let you switch between attackers without discarding your energy. Gallade, which would evolve from the same evolution line, don't forget, was really good for a massive KO at the start of the game, since Psychic Cut would deal 60 plus 20 for each prize card that you decided to flip over, resulting in massive damage if you flipped over all 6. This deck was terrifying and was capable of beating everything in its way. No wonder it won 2008 World Championships. Fast forwarding to 2009 Worlds though, we have an unlikely winner, Beedrill. Band Attack would deal more damage for each Beedrill you had in play. So this, used in combination with another Beedrill, who would search out grass type Pokemon, would let you get Beedrill cards out very fast. So fast in fact that Steven Celestro managed to win it all with this deck. Very fun. One card that was a staple in a lot of these decks at the time was Uxie, and quite honestly this is one of the best cards ever printed. When you benched it, you would draw till you had 7 cards in your hand, all on a basic Pokemon that gave up 1 prize too. This is an insane amount of card draw. You could even use Uxie Level X to have impressive value throughout the whole game too. It was around this time we saw another top support card, one of the best of all time again, and this time it's Claydol. Cosmic Power would let you put 2 cards to the bottom of your deck, and then you would draw till you had 6 cards in hand. Absolutely unbelievable. This would let you constantly get through your deck, without discarding resources as well. A lot of games at the time were decided by who would get their first Claydol out, in all honesty. Next year at 2010 Worlds we had some massive additions to the game. Core Energy would let you grab 2 basic Pokemon and pop them straight onto your bench, as long as you attach it to your active Pokemon. This was good because at the time basic Pokemon search really wasn't the greatest. But Stormfront, oh boy, Stormfront set had some proper heavy hitters, the best of which was Sableye. This card was pretty tame immediately. It would let you force yourself to go first if you led it with its Pokemon body over eager, which is pretty nice. Overconfident could pick up cheeky KOs since its base damage would jump to 40 if your opponent's HP was lower than Sableye's, but Impersonate was its best use, letting you use a supporter as the effect of this attack by discarding it from your deck. This was often used to double up on disruptive supporters like Judge into Cyrus's initiative, more on that later. This would give your opponent a potential 2-card hand. However, if we were to fast forward a little bit to when the black and white rule change was set to come into effect, TPCI had a massive problem, since now you could play any card you wanted on your first turn. With cards like Crobat G, Seeker and Plus Power, Sableye would be able to win 80% of games on your first turn going first, before your opponent has had a chance to do anything. This forced TPCI to step in and rotate sets early to stop this killer interaction, since you could use Seeker to force your opponent to pick up one card. You could pile in a ton of damage via Crobat G into another one of their bench Pokemon to KO it, and then you would use Plus Power as an Expert Belt to KO whatever was in their active. This was scarily consistent. Other heavy hitters from Stormfront include Gengar, whose fainting spell could KO your opponent's Pokemon whenever they KO'd you. This worked really well with Vileplume a little bit later on. Machamp had the takeout attack that would auto KO any basic Pokemon, and Gyarados would swing for 90 damage for 0 energy. All of these were serious metagame forces. And make sure to check out this video sponsors Dragon Shield for the best accessories in the game. Make sure to use that link in the description and use code BERTS to get 5% off. Also help support the channel as well. We were also given the SB Pokemon around this time too. These were all basic Pokemon that were owned by a trainer. For example, Cyrus, Elite Four or Gym Leaders. And they also had some powerful trainer cards to support them. For example, Poketurn would let you pick up an SP Pokemon and put it back into your hand. This could let you heal it, or it would let you abuse coming into play powers like Crobat G for example, who would let you put 10 damage on one of your opponent's Pokemon when you benched it. Energy Gain would reduce attack cost of the SP Pokemon it was attached to, and Power Spray would let you stop your opponent from using a Poke Power. Very strong. All of these were made playable thanks to Cyrus Conspiracy Supporter, letting you grab a supporter card, a basic energy and a galactic invention, of which all those Poketurn etc. all were. The SP era was defined by the Lux Chomp deck. Luxray GR level X would let you bring a Pokemon into the active when you evolved into it, and Flash Bite would deal a respectable 60 damage for 1 energy if you had an energy gain attached. This was paired with Garchomp C level X. Healing Breath would heal all the damage from your SP Pokemon when you evolved into it, which was, well, pretty nice. The attack Dragon Rush though was amazing. For a single double colorless energy attachment with an energy gain attached, you would deal an 80 damage snipe to anywhere on your opponent's board. This would decimate the format. This combination of speed, aggression and control made Lux Chomp one of the strongest decks of all time, leading it to win the 2010 World Championships, stopping Gardevoir-Gallade from back-to-backing. Unfortunately though, it was caught in the crossfire from that Sableye rule change I mentioned earlier, so its time in the format was short-lived. Broken Time Space was one of the most broken stadiums of all time. This would let all Pokemon evolve the same turn they were put into play. This would allow evolution decks to try and keep up with the speed that SP Pokemon offered. Bebe Search was a format staple, letting you grab any Pokemon from the deck. Spiritomb was one of the best Pokemon for slowing down the SP decks, and it featured heavily in that 2010 runner-up deck Gardevoir-Gallade that we mentioned earlier. Since when it was in the active, your opponent couldn't play any trainer cards, and its Darkness Grace attack would allow you to evolve your Pokemon too. Lastly, Flygon Level X was a very unique deck at the time. Its Wind Erosion Pokebody would discard the top card of your opponent's deck in between turns. So with a Memory Berry, you could lock a Pokemon in the active via Trapinch's Sandtomb attack and then discard their whole deck at the same time. Gross. Lastly, it's worth looking at the Arceus cards, since you could run as many of them in your deck as you like. And there was one for every type. including 3 level X's. The HeartGold SoulSilver era is up next. It's not too big, but it did have some fun cards. Judge was one of the most impactful cards in my opinion, letting you reset both players' hands down to 4 on a supporter. This was great for disrupting opponents. Smeargle had the portrait Poke power, letting you look at your opponent's hand when Smeargle is in the active once per turn. And if you find a supporter there, you can use it as the effect of this power. This saw a lot of play at the 2012 World Championships, including being in the championship deck. Donphan Prime was a scary turbo deck. With broken time space, you can pop into a turn 1 Donphan and use Earthquake turn 1 very easily. Its exoskeleton body would reduce damage 2 by 30. This featured in the second place deck at 2011 Worlds. Yanmega and Magnezone Prime were format titans. Yanmega Prime would attack for free if you had the same amount of cards in your hand as your opponent, making linear attack and sonic boom super efficient and super easy when you consider Judge was in the format. Magnezone would let you draw till you have 6 cards in your hand, which is a colossal amount, and Lost Bone would deal 50 for each energy that you had attached that you'd sent into the Lost Zone, meaning with energy acceleration this would add up nicely. Magnezone won 2011 Worlds when paired with Emboar, who would accelerate fire energy via its ability Inferno Fandango, and Yanmega Magnezone got 5th place at that year's Worlds too. Vileplume also featured in the second place deck at 2011. It was a dark Vileplume throwback, locking all trainer cards when it was in play. We also have to look at the basic energy cards from this era, cause golly, they are gorgeous. Now we are in the black and white era, and the power creep is starting to be very noticeable. This is most evident with Professor Juniper, who would let you discard your hand to draw 7 cards. Compare this to something like Bebe Search or Celio's Network, and you can see why it instantly became a format staple. The poster boys from this set were Zekrom and Reshiram. Both were 130 HP basic Pokemon with 120 damage attacks, with outrage style attacks that would deal more damage for each damage counter on the Zekrom or Reshiram. Safe to say these were both very powerful. Reshiram would be paired with Typhlosion Prime and Emboar, since both would accelerate fire energy. Zekrom would be paired with Pachirisu and Shaman to accelerate for turn 1 bolt strikes. Both were very strong, but Reshiram was definitely the best out of the gates. Gen 5 also introduced EX cards back into the format, and this time they were full format rockers. Mewtwo EX had the X-Ball attack that would deal 20 damage for each energy attached to both active Pokemon. This would add up very fast, especially when you consider double colorless energy was back in the metagame. All on an 170 HP basic Pokemon too. This had a ton of partners, but Celebi Prime was a fun one, letting you accelerate grass energy while it was in the active. The format literally became Mewtwo EX Wars, since they both hit each other for weakness. This is most evident at the 2012 World Championships, where Mewtwo featured in 6 of the top 8 decks. Mewtwo literally ruled the format. Most of those decks were paired with Darkrai EX. This was one of the only cards that could stand toe to toe with Mewtwo, since Night Spear would deal 90 damage to the active and 30 to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. This would apply a ton of pressure on evolving benched Pokemon. Worth noting, Darkrai EX also resisted Psychic, making it harder for Mewtwo to deal with. And its Dark Cloak ability would give all your Pokemon with Dark Energy a free retreat cost too. Fantastic. Not to mention Dark Patch would accelerate Dark Energy from the discard pile to Darkrai 2. This led to Darkrai Mewtwo winning the 2012 World Championships, and Darkrai when paired with Sableye would win the 2013 World Championships too. Back-to-back years. That Darkrai that Sableye was paired with would gather back item cards from the discard pile with its attack Junk Hunt. N was a Rockets admin reprint, and was every bit as impactful as it was all the way back then, now. And the player base was very excited to see it back in the format. Terrakion was one of the biggest one-prize Pokemon at the time. Its Retaliate attack would deal 120 damage if one of your Pokemon was KO'd last turn. This would smack Darkrai EX for weakness, resulting in massive one-shots. Pokemon Catcher would swap your opponent's active, resulting in a very fast aggressive format, considering Pokemon Catcher was an item card. Empoleon had the Diving Draw ability, letting you discard a card from your hand to draw 2 more. This would lead to a lot of extra card draw if you got multiple of them out. And Attack Command would add up nicely too, dealing 10 damage for each Pokemon you had in play. Empoleon was often paired with Dusknoir. who had the ability we haven't seen before and we haven't seen since, Sinister Hand, which should let you move damage around your opponent's Pokemon in any way you like. This would let you take 6 prize turns easily once you had enough damage in play, making you M-proof for the whole game. Gen 5 also saw the first Ultra Ball print. This would let you discard 2 cards from your hand to grab any Pokemon from your deck. While Pokemon Search was the main use for this card and it was very good at that, also getting certain cards in the discard pile was nice, since this would help improve yourself so you wouldn't draw back into these useless cards in the late game. Or you could get energy in the discard pile for cards like Electric, whose Dynamotor ability would let you attach a lightning energy from your discard pile to one of your benched Pokemon. Zekrom was a target for this, sure, but the main one was Rayquaza EX, whose Dragon Burst attack would deal 60 for each fire or lightning energy you chose to discard. Rayquaza would see a ton of play with Ember or Electric, but Ray Eels did get a top 8 placement at the 2013 World Championships. Gardevoir had a very devastating ability, Gardevoir-Toxin, which would turn off all other Pokemon's abilities when it had a tool card attached. As you could imagine, this would see a ton of play, mostly with Darkrai or Sableye. Blastoise Keldeo was a killer archetype that came out in Boundaries Crossed. The Luge would let you attach as many water energy as you like in the turn, so shout out to Rain Dance Blastoise back from base set. And Keldeo had the Russian ability, which would let you put it in the active when it was on the bench, and Sacred Sword would deal more damage for each water energy attached. This was actually my first competitive deck, and it got a top 4 placement at 2013 Worlds. Later on, Black Kyurem was the recipient of Blastoise energy, since Black Ballista would deal 200 for 4 energy. Later on in Gen 5, we saw the Plasma cards release. These were very similar to the Agro Magma cards back in 2004, in the fact that they had certain cards support them and they had the T Plasma tag, as well as having the blue borders too. For example, Cole's Machine would accelerate a Plasma energy from the deck to one of your Team Plasma Pokemon, and Team Plasma Ball would search for any Team Plasma Pokemon with no drawback. Out the gates, TDK was the most successful Plasma archetype, relying on Kyurem's Blizzard Burn to KO one prize Pokemon, and with Deoxys boosting damage, maybe even starting to reach one-shotting EX Pokemon too. Thundurus would accelerate energy from the discard pile, while also providing solid chip damage with Raid and Knuckle, considering Deoxys would power it up, because Deoxys with its power connectability would boost all your Plasma Pokemon's damage by 10, and this stacks, so if you had 3 of these in play, your other Plasma Pokemon would be dealing an extra 30. TDK had 3 top 8 placements at 2013 Worlds, and at 2014 Worlds, a more aggressive version of Plasma that focused on Plasma Lugia, who would take extra prizes if it KO'd something thanks to its overflow ability, also got a top 8 placement too. Although arguably the most impactful Plasma card wasn't even a Pokemon, it was Hypnotoxic Laser, an item that would poison your opponent's active and put them to sleep on a coin flip too. When paired with Verbank City Gym, this would be an effective extra 30 damage via 2 trainer cards, which was a godsend for some decks, but it would also unlock one of the strongest, most hated cards of all time a little bit later on. Later on, Plasma Blast unleashed the Virizion Genesect archetype on the world, and it ran amok. Virizion would accelerate grass energy from your deck to your Genesect EX, who would then, with the help of G-Booster, decimate anything in its way, dealing 200 damage and shredding through all effects on your opponent's Pokemon. Verdant Wind made it so any Pokemon with a grass type energy was immune to special conditions, so Hypnotoxic Laser wouldn't be very good against it. And Red Signal was Pokemon Catcher on an ability when you would attach a Plasma energy. This deck was so strong that it got 5 out of the top 8 slots at the 2014 World Championships, including a finals mirror match, proving just how strong it was. Now we're into the Gen 6 era of the Pokemon TCG, and we start off with one of the poster boys of the XY set, Yveltal EX. Evil Ball was a powered up version of X-Ball, dealing 20 plus 20 for each energy attached to both active Pokemon, whereas X-Ball was 20 times. Y-Cyclone was also good since it provided a solid 90 damage while preserving energy cards too. Funnily enough, this wasn't the only good Yveltal in the set though, since Baby Yveltal was a very good too, accelerating energy from the discard pile to power up Evil Ball with Oblivion Wing, whilst also being a solid basic one prize attacker. This Yveltal core was incredibly strong, getting 2 top 8s at 2014 Worlds and taking over EUIC 2016. Trevenant had the Forest Cursed ability, which prevented your opponent from playing any items while it was in the active. This took a little while to see play, but when it did, with help from Wally to evolve turn 1 and a break card, it became a metagame force. It was around this time Pokemon Catcher got errated, so now it needed a coin flip to work. So with that in mind, Lysandre was the only reliable Gust in format, and it came out in Flash Fire, since it was a supporter card that would swap your opponent's active. This was an instant format staple, and we still see it in play now via boss's orders. Primal had the intimidating main ability, which would make it immune to damage from basic Pokemon. This actually caused a lot of problems for certain decks, like Plasma for example, that would have no outs to it. Furious Fist released one of the most hated cards of all time, Seismitoad EX. For a single DC attachment you would do Quaking Punch, that would deal 30 damage and stop your opponent from playing any item cards next turn. While this damage seems low, with cards like Muscle Band and Laser Bank combo, this would soon be 80 damage, with all that disruption too. This led to Toad having a ton of partners like Manectric EX, Crobat, Crawdon and Slurpuff. The latter of which actually caused Lysandre's trump card to get banned, because it was way too good, since you would effectively draw your whole deck in a single turn, spam loads of disruption cards, then use Lysandre's trump card to shuffle them all back in for next turn, and then you would end your turn with a Quaking Punch to stop your opponent from doing anything. While Toad never won a World Championships, it did get second place at 2015 Worlds, only losing to a crazy deck no one saw coming. Furious Fist also introduced a ton of fighting type support. Strong Energy was the main one, boosting the fighting type's damage it was attached to by 20 for each one attached. This caused an old card from Gen 5 Landorus EX to start seeing some major play once again, since with Strong Energy, Muscle Band and Fighting Stadium, Hammerhead was now doing 90 damage for 1 energy, and dealing 30 to a benched Pokemon too. Karina helped tie this all over by letting you search for a fighting type and an item card too. Phantom Forces introduced a Crobat line to the format. These would let you place damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon when you evolved into them, and with cards like AZ and Super Scoop Up, you could reuse these throughout the whole game. These are integral to the Seismitoad Crobat deck that got second place at 2015 Worlds. The Nightmarch archetype was incredibly strong right up until it rotated. This would deal 20 damage for each Nightmarch Pokemon you had in the discard pile, and quite honestly this was no joke, since Joltik could attack for a single DCE attachment, meaning in theory you could bin off a ton of Nightmarch Pokemon turn 1 and KO Pokemon as early as your first turn. With all the discarding format like Ultra Ball, Professor Sycamore, Battle Compressor, this deck was extremely fast, scary and strong. VS Seeker was a new format staple, being half a Hollon transceiver, allowing you to grab any supporter card from your discard pile and put it straight back into your hand, ready for immediate use. This would let you run small counts of supporters like Lysandre at 2, since you knew that once one was in the discard pile, you could fetch it back with VS Seeker for the rest of the game. This also opened the door for a more toolbox style of supporter cards like AZ, Xerosic and Olympia to start seeing play. Moving forward to Primal Clash is where we saw one of the most unique decks of all time, Primal Groudon. This card would be immune to all effects of your opponent's trainer cards, so you couldn't Lysandre it or Hypnotoxic Laser it for example. This means you could set it up on the bench with a ton of strong energy and a focus sash, and there was nothing your opponent could do about it. When your Groudon would tank some hits, you would play Scramble Switch to get a new one rolling instantly. A very fun deck. The 2015 World Championship winning deck Archery's Blastoise revolved around a card from Primal Clash, Archie's Ace in the Hole, since this would let you put any water type Pokemon from your discard pile into play as long as it was the last card in your hand when you played it. So Jacob Van Wagner would skew his deck to be able to pull off this Archie's as early as your turn 1. And then you would load up a Keldeo with a ton of energy so it would start swinging ASAP, applying too much pressure too early for your opponent to have any chance to deal with. This led to super fast games that we saw in stream. Wailord from this set was a focal point of a huge shock deck that got second place at 2015 US Nationals, where you would absorb as much damage as possible with Wailord and then heal it via AZ or Max Potion and aim to deck out your opponent whilst doing so. It's a very scary, very effective deck. Maxie wasn't going to let Archie have all the fun though, since Maxie would do the same effect as Archie but for fighting types. This saw the YGZ archetype become meta, where Yveltal and Zoroark would do most of the heavy lifting, but Maxie would fling Gallade into play, who was a beefy stage 2 Pokemon with a nice ability, and an attack too. This however was child's play, since in the expanded format, Maxie would fling this Archeops into play turn 1. And this Archeops would stop your opponent from being able to evolve their Pokemon. Normally this would be very hard to get into play, since it was a fossil and a stage 2, but Maxie changed that, causing Archeops to get banned. Warring Skies was the next set, and it really sped the game up, since Trainer's Mail would let you turbo through your deck, as well as Shaman EX, which was basically Uxie for one less card, and on a 2 prizer that had 110 HP. And even with all those limitations, it was an unbelievable card. Every deck played at least 3 or 4. This caused it to be close to an £100 card. Mega Rayquaza was one of the scariest decks at the time. Emerald Break would deal 30 damage for each Pokemon on your bench. But with Skyfield Stadium, you could have an 8 card bench. So now, with all the Shaman support, you could swing for 240 damage turn 1, since Rayquaza had the Delta Evolution Ancient trait, so it could evolve on your first turn. Terrifying deck when it popped off. Ancient Origin wasn't done with the silly cards though, since we got Forest of Giant Plants, which was basically a broken time-space stadium but exclusively for grass types. And to top it off, there was a Vileplume reprint that would lock all items from being placed whilst it was in play. This would become a devastating archetype with a ton of partners, the best one being Decidueye GX, but we're going to have to wait to Sun and Moon till we get more on that. Forest of Giant Plants also led this Shiftry card to get banned of all things, since there was a grass type Cedar and Nuzleaf. And you could get a ton of these Shiftries in play turn 1 going first, and hope that if you were to flip heads on Giant Fan, which would let you return one of your opponent's Pokemon back into their hand if you flipped heads, you could easily bounce back 3 or more Pokemon back before your opponent had a chance to do anything about it. Hexmaniac was also in this set, and it too would get banned from the expanded format. In Standard though, it was still a massive threat. It would turn off all abilities until the start of your next turn. So you would think this would be a good way to get around Safeguard Pokemon, right? Well, yes. But what players quickly worked out was that you could use this to stop your opponent from ever setting up. Since Shaman and Hooper were used to get in-game, if you could play Hex over and over again with the S-Seeker, you could really stop your opponent from doing anything. Night March, Rayquaza and Mega Mewtwo EX were the biggest abusers of Hexmania. Giratina EX saw a ton of play with Seismitoad EX and Darkrai EX later on too. Its Chaos Whirl attack would prevent your opponent from playing any special energy, stadium or tool cards next turn, meaning you could permanently lock them from playing DCEs and stadiums. Its ability Renegade Pulse would also make it immune to damage from Mega Pokemon, which Mewtwo and Rayquaza really didn't like. Gyarados is actually one of my favourite decks of all time. Its full retaliation attack would deal 30 plus 30 for each damage counter on your bench Magikarp. This would add up really fast, using Magma Basin to get 2 damage counters on your Magikarp as soon as you benched it. Not only that, but Gyarados had the Theta double ancient trait, meaning you could have 2 tool cards attached to it, so you could have double Choice Belt or double Muscle Band if you wanted. Mega Audino is one of the best Cinderella stories in the Pokemon TCG. It was completely unknown going into the 2016 World Championships, where it ended up wrecking the field in convincing fashion, including toppling Greninja in the finals. Greninja was a fantastic deck. Shadow Stitching would stop your opponent from using abilities on their next turn, and Giant Water Shuriken would deal a massive 60 damage snipe by letting you discard a water energy from your hand while Greninja Break was in the active. This was a scary deck, make no mistake about it, but it did take a while to get rolling, but once it did, it was a force. So couple that with Night March being as strong as ever and Vespiquen too, the metagame was perfect for Mega Audino. Since Mega Audino had the Magical Symphony attack, which would deal 110 damage to the active and a 50 damage snipe, as long as you played a supporter card this turn. So not only could you now play extra supporters like Hexmaniac and Pokemon Center Lady to make sure you'd get that 50 damage snipe, but it would also be more than enough to KO evolving one prize Pokemon while they were on the bench like Joltik or Combee. And it worked perfectly since Mega Audino won the 2016 World Championships in convincing fashion. Mega Mewtwo when paired with Gardevoir was a scary deck that was capable of taking massive KOs with Psychic Infinity, which was basically a beefed up X-Ball, but it was also capable of completely healing itself with Shrine of Memories and Damage Swap, since Shrine of Memories would let you use the attacks of your previous evolution, and Mewtwo EX had a Damage Swap attack, which would let you swap damage between both active Pokemon, meaning if you ever left 110 damage on a Mega Mewtwo, you ran the risk of Lysandre plus Damage Swap to completely heal the Mewtwo and take 2 prizes by placing all the prior damage onto your opponent's Shaman EX. Steam Seas introduced the Volcanion archetype to the Pokemon TCG. Steam Up would let you discard a Fire Energy from your hand to boost your Fire type's damage by 30, and this stacked. So if you was able to use 3 Steam Ups in a single turn and attack with Volcanion X's Volcanic Heat, you were dishing out massive damage. The baby Volcanion was great for getting those fire energy back into play too, with that power heater attack. Mega Gardevoir from the same set had a very unique playstyle, dealing more damage for each bench Pokemon you chose to discard. So with Skyfield and a full bench clear, you could deal 190 damage for 2 energy. This would also let you abuse the benefits of Hooper EX and Shaman EX without leaving them into play. So because Despair Rate will clear them all away. But now we are in the Sun and Moon era of the Pokemon TCG, and let's kick it off with these new GX Pokemon, the best of which at the time was the Decidueye. This would let you place 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon once per turn, and it became a deadly partner with Forested Giant Plants and Vileplume too, since you could get them all into play in a single turn. Lily would become the new turn 1 supporter of choice, allowing you to draw till you have 8 cards in your hand on your first turn. Amazing. Guardians Rising is where the fun started though, since Tapu Lele had the Wonder Tag ability, letting you grab a supporter card from your deck when you benched it. So just like Jirachi EX, except this time you had X-Ball as an attack, which didn't hit for weakness, but you had 170 HP too. This led to Tapu Lele becoming an instant format staple, since it could grab Lily for you turn 1, or any supporter instantly without having the downsides of a silly low HP Pokemon like Shaman EX for example. Also in Guardians Rising was Trashalance Garbodor, and this card changed the game instantly. Its Trashalance attack would deal 20 damage for each item in your opponent's discard pile. So bearing in mind VS Seeker, Acrobike, Trainer's Mail and Spirit Links were all staples at the time, Trashalance would add up silly fast. This led to Garbodor decks being 75% of the Day 2 Seattle metagame, and it was 7 of the top 8 decks too, single-handedly booting Trainer's Mail out the format afterwards, and even VS Seeker counts were affected too. Lycanroc in the same set had the Bloodthirsty Eyes ability, which was the same as Bright Look from Luxray level X, letting you swap your opponent's active when you evolved into Lycanroc. Its once per game GX attack Dangerous Rogue was also very strong, dealing 50 for each bench Pokemon your opponent had in play, which was normally good for a massive KO at any point in the game. Gardevoir GX won the 2017 World Championships. Its Secret Spring ability would let you attach an extra fairy energy to your Pokemon once per turn, and Infinite Force would deal a massive 30 damage for each energy attached to both active Pokemon. This would add up very fast. And you could even play Max Potion to heal your Behemoth Gardevoir GX, and it had the Twilight GX attack as well, which would let you shuffle in 10 cards from your discard pile back into your deck. This would let you reuse energy cards that were discarded, or against Garbodor decks you could shuffle in all your items too. Zoroark GX was one of the most influential cards of all. It would basically make you end proof, since you could discard 1 card from your hand to draw 2 more. So with 3 Zoroark GX in play, you can see an additional 6 cards a turn. This would let you play cards like Mallow, which was basically Oracle, or Acerola, which would let you pick up one of your Pokemon, healing it basically. Since Trade would let you draw a ton of cards that these supporters obviously don't draw you. This paired really well with Golisopod GX out the gates, since First Impression worked really well with Acerola and Guzma, but later on Lycanroc became a partner for Zoroark too, as well as Decidueye and basically a ton of other variants as well. Zoroark would win countless events, including 2019 World Championships where it was paired with Garbodor, since Klefki would let you only activate Garbotoxin on your opponent's turn, meaning you got abilities but your opponent didn't. Gross. Buzzwole was set to give Zoroark a run for its money, with its Jet Punch attack, which was great for griefing low HP evolving Pokemon, since it would deal 30 to the active and 30 to the bench. But Knuckle Impact was serviceable, dealing 160 damage. This would KO most things with some strong energy and Dancy Prism in play to boost the damage. Absorption GX would also give you a Gallade style one shot in the early game attacking option too, since it would deal 40 damage for each prize card you have remaining. Buzzwole was mostly paired with Lycanroc for maximum offense, but it would also be paired with Garbodor at some points too. B-String would let you attach a ton of energy from your deck. B-String would let you attach 2 energy from your deck to one of your Ultra Beast Pokemon if your opponent was on 3 or 4 prize cards left. So often your first Buzzwole would fire off a ton of Jet Punches, or maybe an Absorption, and then after it would get KO'd, you would play a couple B-String to set up your next one to close the game out. Scary. One of the only cards that could go toe to toe with Zoroark GX. Malamar reintroduced a stage 1 reattached Pokemon back into the format, except this time it was with Psychic Energy, not Lightning Energy like Electric. Necrozma's GX saw some success, but there was also Ultra Necrozma, which was less consistent but had a higher damage output, since Prismatic Ray from Necrozma GX would have a 60 times multiplier for each energy you chose to discard, but Ultra Necrozma would have an 80 times multiplier, but it would also require having a metal energy attached too. Later on though, Giratina pushed Malamar to higher power levels, since it was a basic one prize Pokemon with 130 HP that will constantly recycle itself with its ability Distortion Door, whilst also spreading damage when using that ability too. Distortion Door would let you take it from the discard pile and put it back onto your bench, and then you put 10 damage on 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon when you did. So you could basically use Circuit Recharge 3 times to get it attacking again instantly. Nice. Rayquaza GX lit up the 2018 World Championships with 3 top 8 placements. Dragon Break would deal 30 for each grass and lightning energy attached to all your Pokemon. Thankfully, Max Elixir was perfect for accelerating these, as well as its ability Stormy Winds, which would let you discard the top 3 cards of your deck when you benched it, but then you could attach an energy card from the discard pile to the Rayquaza. Nice. Shrine of Punishment is one of the best stadium cards of all time. It would place 1 damage counter on all EX or GX Pokemon in between turns while it was in play. This would massively let one prize Pokemon level the playing field against GX Pokemon. And it took over the format via a Buzz Garb Shrine deck, where you would play a ton of high powered one prize Pokemon and let Shrine to do some work too. Buzzwole had the Sledgehammer attack, which would deal 120 damage if your opponent was on 4 prize cards remaining. Combine this with Garbodor's Trash Avalanche, this was a very strong deck. Marshadow was a late addition to the format, but when people cottoned on to how strong it was, it became an irritant, since it was basically judged on a coming into play Pokemon ability, meaning that if you was going first, you could force your opponent to start the game with a 4 card hand, leading to a lot of games being decided before your opponent had a chance to do anything. This Oranguru card made alternate win condition decks tier 1. Resource Management let you shuffle in 3 cards from your discard pile and put them to the bottom of your deck. This would let you reuse powerful cards over and over again, and with cards like Power Pad you can start to make your deck infinitely loop, so you would deck out your opponent first. Often paired with Zoroark or Pidgeotto to provide draw power throughout the game, these control decks got very scary, leading to a ton of other decks to play their own Oranguru just to help combat it. Pidgeotto Control even got a top 8 placement at 2019 Worlds. Jirachi was introduced to the format in Team Up, and it became a staple for Zapdos decks, Pikarom decks and Malamar decks, Bucephalon decks too. It would let you look at the top 4 cards of your deck, take a trainer card you found there, and shuffle the rest back in, when Jirachi was in the active. But after that, Jirachi would go to sleep. This was okay though, since if you attach an escape board to Jirachi, it could retreat for free, and while it was asleep too. Amazing card, although not quite as good as the Deoxys one. Pikarom in the same set was a powerhouse though. A basic Pokemon that was a tag team. Now these gave up 3 prize cards sure, because it had so much support. Thunder Mountain would reduce the attack cost by 1 lightning energy, meaning you could use full blitz for 2 energy attachments, which would then let you attach 3 lightning energy from your deck to one of your Pokemon, immediately setting up another Pikarom ready for battle. Or you could set up the active to use Tag Bolt GX, which would deal 200 damage to the active and an 170 damage snipe to the bench if you had an additional 3 lightning energy attached. This would KO bench Tapu Lele or anything else really, often leading to 4 prize turns. And if you think these attacks seem a little bit underpowered, don't worry, because you had access to Electro Power. These would boost your lightning type's damage by 30 for each one you played this turn. Pikarom could also use Tapu Koko for its GX attack Tapu Thunder, since when you benched it, you could fling it into the active and move all energies attached to it. And Tapu Thunder would deal 50 for each lightning energy attached to all your opponent's Pokemon. This made Pikarom a very scary deck, and it got a top 8 placement at Worlds and was relevant right up until it rotated. Tag teams also had a shiny new engine to play with, the Tag Call engine. Tag Call would let you grab 2 tag team cards and put them straight into your hand. Not just tag team Pokemon though, since there were tag team supporters too. Guz Mahala would let you grab a Stadium, Special Energy and a Tool card too, allowing for you to easily search for your Thunder Mountain or Power Plant or any Stadium of choice really. Cynthia and Caitlyn would let you draw 3 cards and get back a supporter from your discard pile too. Not bad. But there were other tag team Pokemon. Let's take a look at some of the standouts. Mewtwo and Mew tag team won the 2019 World Championships. Its perfection ability let you use the attacks of any GX attacks you had in play or in your discard pile. Insanely strong. With a combination of Welder and Rainbow Energy, you could really make a toolbox of silly attacks, like Espeon Deoxys Cross Division to spread 200 damage turn 2, or use Venom Shot from Naganadel GX to deal 170 damage snipe, or Lava Throw from Macargo for massive damage. You could even use Tag Purge to make yourself immune from other tag team Pokemon next turn. Welder wasn't just played with Mewtwo and Mew tag team though, since it was the focal point of the Reshizard archetype. Reshizard really appreciated those fire energies that Welder would attach, since Double Blaze would deal 300 damage and shred through all effects on your opponent's active if you had 6 fire energy attached in total. Flare Strike also did a clean 230 damage, which is pretty nice. This got 2 top 4 placements at 2019 Worlds too. One being an ability based build using Ninetales and Victini Prism, and one using the Greens version to use Volcanion to accelerate energy and Greens to search out combo pieces. Gengar Mimikyu took a while to see play, but when it did, it was format defining. Horror House will stop your opponent from playing any card from their hand next turn. So if you use this turn 1 going second, you basically force your opponent to skip their turn and not be able to set up at all. And then you can capitalise by either using Poltergeist, which would deal 50 for each trainer card in your opponent's hand, or by switching into another attacker like Trevenant Dusknoir to use Night Watch to start shuffling away 2 random cards from your opponent's hand. Remember, Mewtwo and Mew tag team could do all of this as well. Lucario Melmetal GX took until Sword and Shield to release to be at its apex of its powers, and so did ADP too. But ADP was playable out the gates. ADP had the Alter Creation GX attack, which would boost your Pokemon's damage by 30 for the rest of the game. And if you had an extra energy attached, you'd be able to take an extra prize card whenever you KO'd something. This would be game breaking, since now Ultimate Ray would KO all bench sitters like Dene GX, Tapu Lele, and later on Crobat V, and turn them into free prize KOs. The immediate partner for ADP was Keldeo GX, which had the Safeguard ability, which would prevent damage done to it via GX and EX Pokemon. And with the Alter Creation boost, you would one-shot one prize Pokemon too, like Giratina. So Keldeo would start to wall the whole format out. However, when Sword and Shield would come out, ADP would go from a tier 2 deck all the way to a top 5 deck of all time in my opinion, since Zacian V unlocked the deck, one of the most silliest cards I've ever seen. For 3 metal energy, you did a table shattering 230 damage, and this on its own would have been good. But after the Alter Creation boost and Vitality Band or Galarian Zigzagoon, which was basically Crobat G, you can start one-shotting tag team Pokemon now with this basic Pokemon. Crazy talk. And with Metal Saucer coming out in the same set, even if your ADP went down immediately after using Alter Creation, it didn't matter since you could power up Zacian with that. Lucario Melmetal would also use Zacian V, but in a much more defensive way, with Full Metal Wall GX reducing damage done to your Metal type Pokemon by 30 for the rest of the game. With Metal Frying Pan, you could reduce that damage even more by an extra 30, making Zacian super tanky. And with Mallow and Lana tag team, it was even harder to KO Zacian V since that would heal 120 damage. Zacian could even opt to go for a standalone strategy using Jirachi Prism. Jirachi Prism would let you take an additional prize card if you took it as one of your face down prize cards. So with a combination of Oranguru to put it to the top of the deck and Mr. Mime to get it into your prizes, you actually have a little mini Alter Creation effect without having to bother with all that, well, Alter Creation business. This led to the format being taken over by Zacian in one way or another. Marnie was also in the Sword and Shield set, and it had a unique effect that we hadn't seen before, forcing both players to put their hand to the bottom of their deck, and whoever played it would then draw 5 cards from the top and the opponent would get 4. This was a devastating form of hand disruption, since you could guarantee your opponent wouldn't get back the cards that they previously had. The Shady Dealings engine took a while to see play, but when it did, it really took over the format. When you evolved into Drizzile, you would get to search your deck for one trainer and put it into your hand. This is an insane consistency boost. And when you evolve into Intellion, you could grab 2 trainers, letting you piece together insane combo turns. Its attack was even usable, Aqua Bullet, dealing 120 damage to the active and a 20 snipe too. The meta at one point basically became Intellion plus any random Vmax. And quite honestly, it was quite fun. Scoop Up Net from Rebel Clash worked crazy well with the Intellion engine, since it would let you pick up a non-V or EX Pokemon and put it straight into your hand. allowing you to reuse powerful coming into play abilities like Shady Dealings, Headbutt Tantrum, or Mind Report from Mewtwo. Another card that would change the game from Rebel Clash was Boss's Orders. This was essentially a Lysandre reprint, but since there was no support of Gust in the game at the time, this was a massive addition. ADPZ would now be able to reliably go around whatever your opponent was playing, since you could essentially Boss's Orders twice and KO 2 bench sitters for 3 prizes each time. This led to the player base absolutely despising the ADPZ archetype. Eternatus Vmax was like a Mega Rayquaza, since it would deal 30 damage for each dark type you had in play. But while 180 damage doesn't sound that great, thanks to its ability, Eternal Zone, we could actually have 8 bench dark type Pokemon. Now Jaden had no problems one-shotting everything in the game, since it would start off at 270 damage if you had all the dark types in play, and with Galarian Zigzagoon you could easily get to 300. This is one of the only decks that could go toe to toe with ADPZ. This deck would play 4 Crobat V, because it had the Dark Asset ability, which would let you draw till you had 6 cards in your hand, but you could only use one of them per turn. This is fine though, because we did have the Dene GX in format too, and a lot of other ways to draw cards, so this was just one more tool in the toolbox. Later on in Battle Styles we saw the Rapid Strike and Single Strike archetypes get introduced. These were like villainous cards in a way, because they all had tags, and certain cards would interact and support them. The poster boys were the Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX and Single Strike Urshifu VMAX. Single Strike Urshifu would deal a colossal 270 damage, while going through all effects on your opponent's Pokemon. But with Single Strike Energy, that would boost the damage by 20 for each one attached. This would add up really quickly, and capable of clearing the way of anything in format. These energies were accelerated from the deck via Houndoom. There was no way to accelerate Rapid Strike Energy, but that's okay, because it accounted for 2 energies at the same time, either fighting or water. Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX had a beefed up first impression attack, dealing 150 damage when it came into the active, and also had Gmax Rapid Flow, which would deal 120 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon, an insane amount of spread damage. Both decks were awesome and saw a ton of success right up until they rotated. Medicham V also saw a lot of play, some outside the Rapid Strike archetype and a lot of it inside. Its Yoga Loop attack would let you place 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon, and if you KO'd that Pokemon, you would actually steal a turn from your opponent. Absolutely wild. Chilling Reign introduced arguably the best stadium of all time, Path to the Peak. This would turn off all Pokemon abilities from Rulebox Pokemon. This would stop so many decks in their tracks. This stadium single-handedly forced decks to play more stadium cards just to counter it, or lean into non-Rulebox abilities like Bibarel or Intellion. Crazy calm. Umbreon VMAX was very useful, since it had the Bright Look ability, or Bloodthirsty Eyes ability, or whatever it was actually called. However, it's mostly here for the collectors and the insane price that it commands. Fusion Strike introduced to us one of the best cards of all time, but it was one that the player base hated. Battle VIP Pass, letting you grab 2 basic Pokemon and put them straight onto the bench as long as it was your first turn of the game. Every deck could use this, and pretty much every deck did. This would work for little non-V decks and hefty VMAX decks too. But what it did do is make the game very polarized, since if you missed Battle VIP Pass and your opponent didn't, you was very rarely going to be able to come back into the game. And of course that would also compound the issue, since now you had 4 Battle VIP Pass in the deck that were functionally useless. The Fusion Strike core from the same set, in my opinion, led to Mew VMAX being one of the strongest decks of all time. Genesect V would let you draw till you had the same amount of cards in your hand as Fusion Strike Pokemon in play. So if you had 0 cards in your hand and 6 Fusion Strike Pokemon in play, you would straight up draw 6 cards. And you could use multiple of these in a turn, meaning you didn't actually have to run any draw supporters, since Genesect would draw you all the cards you needed. Mew VMAX would copy Genesect's attack with Cross Fusion Strike, which would let you use any one of your Fusion Strike Pokemon's attacks as this attack. Mew VMAX had a beefy 310 HP with a 3 retreat cost, so attacking with it was great. You could even use Mew V's Psychic Leap to effectively remove it from play and heal all the damage on it. Max Miracle could also shred through all effects on your opponent's Pokemon too. But 210 damage from Techno Blast doesn't sound very high, right? Well, with Power Tablets, it would actually get scarily high, because these would boost your damage by 30 for each one you played. So now you could one-shot anything if you played enough Power Tablets. Meloetta in the deck though made it unstoppable in my opinion. since Murderous Echo would deal 70 for each Fusion Strike energy you had in play. That sounds quite tame, right? Well, on your first turn going second, you could attach one from your hand for turn, then use a Lesser Sparkle to pluck 2 more out the deck, and all of a sudden you are dealing 210 damage on your first turn, which provided you found any modifier, Choice Belt or Power Tablet, you could KO a V Pokemon on your first turn. This meant Mew VMAX had a plan going first and a plan going second, which is very rare for a deck. Eventually there were even disruption builds of Mew VMAX that would run Path to the Peak itself and a ton of ways to remove it, just so you could draw a lot of cards and then you'd end your turn with an attack and Path to the Peak so your opponent couldn't use their abilities. Mew VMAX won 2023 Worlds and got a top 8 placement at 2022 Worlds as well. And it won numerous regionals and specials, leading to Creatures Inc. printing so many counters like Mightyena, who would one-shot a Mew VMAX for 0 energy, Drapion, who would literally do the same, Spiritomb, which would stop Genesect from drawing cards, and literally it didn't matter one bit, Mew VMAX was just too strong. One of the decks that could stand up to Mew VMAX was Arceus Vstar, a 2-prize Pokemon with 280 HP. Starbirth, which was a once per game ability, would let you grab any 2 cards from your deck, meaning you were essentially dead draw proof. The real strength of Arceus Vstar though was its versatility, since it attacked for 3 colourless energy, and then you could accelerate 3 basic energy from your deck to your V Pokemon in any way you like. This led it to having an absolute myriad of partners. Flying Pikachu VMAX, which would end up winning 2022 Worlds, since its lightning type would KO the metagame threat at the time Palkia Vstar, and it would be immune to basic Pokemon damage next turn. Arceus Duraludon got 2nd place at NAIC 2023, and it won EUIC 2023 and some regionals too. Duraludon VMAX had the Skyscraper ability, which would make it immune from damage from any Pokemon that had special energy attached, and with a monstrous 330 HP and a 220 damage shred attack, it really wasn't going anywhere. I mentioned Palkia Vstar earlier, it was a very strong deck. Subspace World would deal 60 plus 20 for each bench Pokemon in play, and for 2 water energy as well, meaning you could play Melanie to get it swinging in a single turn. Not only was it a heavy hitter though for low energy, its Star Portal ability would let you attach 3 water energy from your discard pile to your water type Pokemon in any way you like, on a once per game V-Star ability. This would open up the door for some other attackers like Abominable V, Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX, but mostly Radiant Greninja. Radiant Greninja had the Conceal Cards ability, letting you discard an energy card from your hand to draw 2 more. So that's fine, but with Star Portal you could actually attack with it using Moonlight Shuriken, which was like a baby G-Max Rapid Flow, dealing 90 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. Crazy attack that could grief 2 baby evolution Pokemon before they've had a chance to evolve into their stage 1, like Sobble, or bring down 2 VMAX Pokemon into range of Subspace Swell. On top of that, there was a new Karina card in Irida, which would let you grab a water type Pokemon and an item card too. The only other Radiant Pokemon that gave Greninja a run for its money was Radiant Charizard. Combustion Blast did a massive 250 damage for 1 energy, and since Excited Heart would reduce the energy cost by 1 for each prize card your opponent has taken, it actually meant attacking with it was very easy. Lost Origins would introduce a Lost Zone mechanic back into the game, and if you had 10 cards in your Lost Zone, Sableye would spread an absolutely silly 12 damage counters for 1 energy. And Giratina V-Star would also KO anything in its way via its V-Star attack, Star Requiem. And if you had 7 cards in the Lost Zone, you could use Mirage Gate, which would let you attach 2 basic energy from your deck to your Pokemon in any way you like. Kind of like how Beast Ring would. This would let you power up a myriad of different attackers. But how would you get in cards in the Lost Zone though? Well, Chorus Experiment would let you look at the top 5 cards of your deck, keep 3 and put 2 in the Lost Zone, very good, not bad. And then Comfey would let you look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put 1 in your hand and 1 in Lost Zone when Comfey was in the active. Between all that, the Lost Box archetype was born. Some of them would use heavy attackers, like Dragonite V, Giratina V-Star, Kyogre and Rayquaza. Amazing Rare Rayquaza had the amazing Burst attack, which would let you discard any amount of basic energy attached to the Rayquaza, and you did 80 for each different type of energy you discarded in this way. This gave Lost Box decks the power to not only hit the bench via Sableye, but also swing into the active very hard. Around the same time, there was a Reddy's deck, which was very unique in its playstyle. If you had every single Reggie in play, you could use Regigigas ability Ancient Wisdom, which would let you attach 3 energy cards from your discard pile to your Pokemon in any way you like, including special energy. This meant you could attack with any Reggie at any time, and it was a very fun deck that actually did pretty well. However, when Silver Tempest came out, in my opinion, we saw the strongest deck of all time, Lugia Vstar. Lugia Vstar would let you grab 2 colorless Pokemon from your discard pile and put them straight into play, allowing you to bypass normal evolution rules. So once you got 2 Archeops in a discard pile, you could use Summoning Star to get them straight back into play immediately. And once you did have those Archeops into play, you could now start to use Primal Turbo, a ridiculous ability that would let you attach 2 special energies from your deck to your Pokemon. And with powerful energy being in format that would boost colorless Pokemon by 20 for each one attached, this would start to get silly. So now Lugia V-Star's attack Tempest Dive could reach silly numbers. But you could also use Stoutland V to pick up extra prizes on low HP Pokemon, like the ones seen in Lost Box. However, due to the special energy in format like Aurora Energy, you could now start to use pretty much any attacker you like Amazing Rare Raikou, which would deal 120 damage to the active and 120 to a bench Pokemon. Again, wrecking low HP decks like Lost Box. Snorlax would be immune to Sablei's Lost Mine thanks to its ability, and would be a beefy one prizer. But the real standout was Yveltal, which would auto KO anything with Amazing Destruction, and you could power it up in a single turn via those Primal Turbos. Madness. Silver Tempest Lugia was the best deck at the time, and you had zero reason not to play it, making it, in my opinion, the strongest deck of all time. And even after all the good special energy rotated, it was still a tier 2 deck with the single strike package. This takes us into the Scarlet and Violet era of the Pokemon TCG. We now have EX cards back, but this time they're not all basic Pokemon. Koraidon wasn't very good, but Miraidon is, with its tandem unit ability letting you grab 2 basic lightning Pokemon and putting them straight into your bench. With cards like Regigigas Vmax to boost the damage and Electric Generator to accelerate energy from the deck, this archetype saw immediate success at EUIC 2023 and LAIC 2024. The latter of which also had Iron Hands in format, which would let you take extra prize cards if you KO'd something. At EUIC 2023, Miraidon got a top 8 placement, and at LAIC 2024, it actually won it all. Gardevoir EX got 2nd place at EUIC 2023, and its ability would let you attach as many Psychic Energy from your discard pile to your Psychic types as you like, but you did have to put 2 damage counters on them for each energy you attached. This worked stupidly well with the Chilling Reign Gardevoir, who would do 60 plus 30 for each Psychic Energy attached. You also had Zacian V with the same attack, but since it had a higher HP, you could power it up even faster and to KO anything you liked realistically. And it also got 2nd place at 2023 Worlds as well. Paldea Revolved introduced a new kind of Rockets admin into the game, but it fused Marnie and N together, since now both players would put their hands to the bottom of the deck and draw the same amount as prize cards they had left, becoming instantly one of the best cards of all time, doubling up as an early game draw supporter and a late game disruption option. We also got a spiritual successor to the Blastoise Keldeo deck, but this time it was Baxcalibur and Chien-Pao. Chien-Pao would search for 2 water energy while it was in the active, and Hellblade would deal 60 for each water energy you discarded, and Baxcalibur would let you attach as many water energy as you like. Massive numbers. And finally, we're going to end the video with Charizard EX, an absolutely devastating card, a Terra Dark type, which made it really good for slapping Gardevoir GX and Mew VMAX for weakness. 330 HP is crazy, and its Burning Darkness ability would accelerate 3 fire energy from your deck to any one of your Pokemon when you evolved it. Madness. Its attack was really good too, dealing 180 damage plus 30 for each prize card your opponent has taken. This would add up pretty fast, 2-shotting everything in the early game and then starting to threaten 1-shots at the end. And after the 2024 rotation, it became the undisputed best deck in format, winning EUIC 2024 in very convincing fashion, combined with Barrel and Pidgeot to search cards. Thank you for watching this video. If you made it this far, why don't you check out this 4-hour video here where I go through the best and worst cards from every Pokemon TCG set.